existing non-sustainable product and struggle to convince customers to choose your product over the other. Consumer behavior plays a very critical role, and we would delve deeper in this webinar. Before we delve into our exciting topic, let me introduce NSERCEL, startup incubator of IIM Bangalore, like many of you already know. We have been around in this ecosystem for about more than 20 years now. We have been a catalyst in entrepreneurship ecosystem by bringing together brilliant minds and startup founders like you, implementation partners, government bodies, startup ecosystem partners, and more founders to give them a 360-degree perspective and support that the founders actually need. Within NSERCEL, we run about 14 different programs, and one key vertical out of them is Impact Orbit. And as the name suggests, Impact Orbit nurtures social entrepreneurs and their innovations in social impact. We have 3 sub-verticals in Impact Orbit: tech-enabled social innovations in partnership with Capgemini, circular economy and climate tech in partnership with Pernod Ricard India Foundation, and rural innovations in partnership with YSB. We have incubated about more than 100 ventures till now and plan to support more than 200 ventures in the next 3 years. We have ran about 8 cohorts since 2017 and helped our ventures raise more than 20+ crore as grants across cohorts, and proudly saying impacted 1.3 million lives across 20 states in India. So if you are working in social impact sector, if you need any kind of support, do reach out to us. We would love to talk to you. Before we delve into the topic, I would also like to highlight few of our many heroes in social impact sector. Mitti Cafe, a chain of non-profit inclusive cafes operated by people with physical and intellectual disabilities. You might have spotted one while you are on your way in or out Bangalore airport. We have Pad Care, creator of the world's first sanitary pad recycling system. Their impact is pretty impressive, with installations in 500+ workspaces till now, including major corporates like JLL, Mahindra, and more. We have TrashCon as well. They have completely changed the way we see waste management ecosystem at this point. Their mission is to achieve zero waste future, generating value from every bit of waste, which is pretty impressive. Now diving into our webinar topic today, our very first speaker, Ms. Theresa here, is a data-driven decision maker and behavior specialist. She is the founder of Bombay Breed Consulting, wherein she loves to solve upstream business challenges. She will first shed light on challenges faced in influencing consumer behavior, particularly in circular economy and climate action space. She will also provide us with some eye-opening examples to illustrate the complexity of the issue. Next, we have Kavit from Proclime. He will share valuable insights from Proclime's initiatives with large institutions and strategies that they have employed to achieve sustainable practices and behaviors. Proclime's vision of achieving net zero through scalable and impactful projects serves as an inspiring example of how organizations can make significant difference in sustainability space. So let's dive right in. Theresa, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashna. I'm going to take over the screen for my presentation. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is. You can make it full screen.
It's okay? You've got the whole screen?
No, I don't have the full screen now.
My screen is not visible, Kavit?
It is visible, but it's not present in your full slide deck. It's not full screen.
No?
You'll have to get off you'll have to minimize the screen and then give the full screen. That it works better that way.
But that's what I've done. See?
Okay, while we are at it, attendees, please keep dropping your questions in chat box and Q&A. We will answer them, me and my team will answer them.
Kavin, it's okay? Thank you.
Yeah, it works.
Hi, how many of us today? Ashna, do you
have 65 and more.
Okay, so thank you for joining. That's today's topic is not meant to be very academic. It's meant to be immersive, and it's meant to kind of shed light on the larger issues that govern the space of circular economy when it comes to human behavior and inherent social apathy that exists, that the space deals with in a more intimate sort of a form than many other industries. And we'll get into that as we go along. My name is Theresa Ronnie. I run Bombay Breed. Bombay Breed is a business consulting company, as Ashna pointed out. My background is I have spent 20 years as a cultural documenter and a brand creator from the advertising space. And then I moved into upstream consulting, where I was working with Big Four and with Microsoft, where we were solving for business challenges with a cultural angle. What I want to do is to quickly give you a lowdown of what today's discussion will be. I will keep it faster paced and slower. I'm sure that I will share the deck with Ashna so you can go through the details at your pace. Basically, if we have to break this presentation down, there are three parts. I want to just decode human behavior, not in a very academic way, but in a very practical and experienced manner. Second part of this will be how can we hack the ways that we create behavior loops? How do you hack them so that you are able to convert what you see as observed human behavior? Once you hack it, then how do you channel that into positive action towards a circular economy discussion, right? And therefore, making it cool to care is where I will land this presentation on. Yes. There are multiple factors that go into human behavior and social environment. And there is a fair bit of, I apologize. And then there is a fair bit of person and environment conversation that needs to be had. The beauty about the human genetic makeup is that we are social animals. We respond to the different social groups that we existed. There is a micro behavior, which is limited to me, myself, my space, and I. And then there's a meso behavior, which is my family, my friends, my environment, my relatives, my school, my college, my workplace. And then there's the macro approaches, which is my city, my state, my planet, so it extends outward, right? And the animal, when you place the social animal, that is the human being, in different strata of economy, they behave differently. There has been a substantial shift in the human genetic makeup from the time that we were hunter-gatherers to the time that we, what Darwin came in and observed as evolutionary processes, to what we observe now as new Darwinism, where we have, as a race, hit a critical mass point and a point of inflection in our interaction with our planet as the prevailing species, and the point of singularity from where we are being observed now as planetary keepers of how we take this moment forward in history so that we conserve and sustain and act as protectors and conservators versus destroyers and extractors, right? Which is I think the one of the larger aspects of where we are today as a generation. There is a high level of cognitive dissonance that comes in the minute you talk about having two options in hand. Do I eat ice cream now, or do I eat it? So the question would be, can I have one ice cream now, or can I have an ice cream and a chocolate bar in the morning tomorrow, right? When one is faced with these choices, the conflicting view always is to take the easier route out because of the cognitive dissonance that we carry as a human organism. The last macro point here is that because we were talking about how the human approach within a social organism, whether it's a micro, meso, or a macro organism, there is a herd mentality that applies. And the minute you apply that herd mentality, then its influence on society can either be positive or negative. But for the most part, modern herds, as ancient herds and any herd that comes, it goes into a protection lockdown mechanism, which means that, and we will get further into that as we go further. There is a slide where I will discuss this at slight depth, where what happens is that you standing out of the herd becomes an evolutionary disadvantage to you and your genetic pool. We will discuss this as we go along. Yeah. So to this effect, what we observe is that something like this, which we see on a daily basis, especially in a city like Bangalore. I don't know how many of you are from Bangalore, and how many of you have logged in from outside Bangalore? But Bangalore definitely has a garbage problem. When you see, and there are days when, especially now with the monsoons, it's a recipe for complete disaster. With bio waste and wet waste mixing in the water, what that also does is it becomes a breeding ground for disease, and the water becomes a carrier for disease. But there is general apathy, and it does not trigger us into action. Looking at a garbage pile up should typically trigger a negative reptilian response in us, but we just continue to walk ahead. We sidestep garbage, and we move along. And this is an observed behavior across majority of the Indian mega cities that we observe, right? So what is the reason for that? So if you have to understand human apathy, and within the context of the environment, there are multiple. I have decoded 6 for this presentation's sake so that it's contained. The first insight that I have on this is that the problem that we face today, the way it has gathered momentum and snowballed, is that the problem is larger than one individual, right? It's easy for us to set a table or to clean a house, but when you think about cleaning a city, cleaning garbage, just the red tape around the whole conversation, or the indirectness of the solution, and the inaccessibility of the solution to the everyday man, it is a problem that is bigger than the individual, and therefore the behavioral pattern that you notice is to switch off the triggers from affecting you on an individual level. The second insight I have observed is that the environment is the perfect crime, and the victim lives in the future. The disadvantage that you create out of your fossil fuels, in the start of the 20th century, if you were Henry Ford, you saw the business potential that it brought. You saw the growth potential. You saw the fact that you're building mega assembly line automotive production, which will lay the groundwork for assembly lines and mega factories of the future. What Henry Ford could not have foreseen was the ecological damage. So his industry, the automotive industry, is the byproduct of the petrochemical industry, right? Now, the petrochemical industry rode on the boom of automotive, because automotive came in and it disbursed petroleum products in liquid petroleum and gasoline form across the world, right? So there was a higher consumption. But what it also meant is that the degradation loop would become more evident with one trigger of Henry Ford starting an automotive company. There's no way he could have known that. But the trigger that he pulled, we know from everything from oil slicks to, ozone pollution to carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide emissions. And now we are talking about trying to find, because there's, global warming. So so what happens is it's a butterfly effect, right? And when you, in one generation, do something to the environment, it's a perfect crime where the victim, unfortunately, is your future progeny. So you may say, okay, I'm not planning to have kids. It's not my problem. But your brother's children are going to bear the brunt. Your niece and nephews and your friends, your best friends' children are going to bear the brunt. The third one is, it comes back to the social approaches. So the third insight that I have for today's discussion is that we, as a society, tend to blame someone versus claim the responsibility of a fault. And this is again a hunter-gatherer mindset where if you got thrown out of the society, or if you were not accepted into the society, and if the sun was setting, then you were going to be mammoth food, or you're going to be a saber-tooth food, right? And in modern societies, then you had lions and tigers and whatever else, or you had bandits. So you didn't want to be thrown out and ostracized out of your community. You didn't want to be caught out of your community. So what ended up happening as a genetic evolution or a mutation of the gene, so to speak, is that the default setting started becoming, I'm not to be blamed, I'm blameless, right? So when you take a higher order stance where you says, I'm not blameless, I'm not to be blamed, then the flip side of that coin is then you need a fall guy. Then you need a scapegoat. So you always find someone to scapegoat, and that should not be you. It's musical chairs, right? When the music is playing, everyone's running around. But then when it stops, you don't want to be left out without a chair to be sitting on. You'd rather push someone out and sit down and keep yourself live for one more round. The same, unfortunately, that playground behavior continues into adulthood and into social cohorts. This is an important one for me because it's an erosion of the evolutionary process. So we've devolved by evolution. There is a circadian rhythm. What I mean by circadian rhythm is the sun rising, the sun setting, when the cicadas come out in the night. So the biorhythm of the planet and the biorhythm of the human species were interlinked. Right? We were not nocturnal creatures because we were not predatory. We were not night predators. We were not equipped with night predatory skills, right? So we went into social gathering cohorts where we woke with the sun, we worked with the sun, and then we slept with the moon. The minute the sun went away to sleep, we went away to sleep. Few people guarded the village, but by and large, that was our routine. Now, because of industrialized living for the last 200 odd years, what's happened is we have bucked that behavioral pattern on an individual basis, on a social cohort basis, on a macro basis. We have broken the format completely. We work 24 hours to extract minerals and essential fossil fuels from the soil, from the ground. We have servers running 24 hours. We have ACs and cars and batteries being charged 24 hours. And we have more people getting plugged into this system every day. And we are taking pride in the way that we are moving forward, right? Now, is this a moral discussion? It's not. Is it an ethical discussion? It's not. Is it a sustainability discussion? It is. So when you look at how sustainable our behavior is, because we have gone from having a behavior that was aligned and in sync with our natural, natural biorhythm, we have hacked that and replaced it with the terrible schedules which go outside of natural rhythms. So when you replace great habits with terrible ones, what ends up happening is that you cannot just make alterations and adjustments anymore. You need to reset, or you need to find a way to have a conversation where you delink in crucial points of the cycle, and then you replug in once you have fixed that bug, right? That's the fourth point that I had for you. The fifth one is how, from a social order perspective, we have always, and this is true of the entire human generation, of the human race, where our inherent need to pass the buck downwards. So if I'm in a household where I have 3 children, I'm the second of 3 children, then if there's a task my mom gives my elder sister will say, you know what, jadu pocha tu kar. Right? You go and sweep the house. Mom wants the house clean, you go sweep the house. I'm the second kid. If the third kid is of the age where the third kid can go and sweep and do the chore, then the second kid passes the buck to the third kid saying, you go and do it because I say so, right? That behavior that you observe in as young children as siblings stays with us, and we don't want to make our beds after we wake up. Somebody else will do it for us. There's some level of conceited pride that we carry as a social animal, where we see a certain level of accomplishment in passing the buck downwards. So I will buy products, like I will buy a car. I'll buy the latest Mercedes-Benz GLS badge, and I will dispose my 3-year-old car, which runs perfectly fine. But it doesn't matter to me what happens to that car, right? What is the scrappage policy on it, where the parts are going? I don't care. I'm getting to flaunt the newest and the most badass version of the most luxurious car brand in the world for my social strata, and I'm very happy to not worry about. So that attitude percolates everywhere, starting from as simple a place as a home to a boardroom to policymakers and decision making. We want to pass the buck downwards. The last insight I want to discuss today for this discussion is, there is a certain level of badassery we feel when we are very detached, and there's a certain level of cool with I don't care. When you care, it's not seen to be cool. Very uncool people care about things. Like Mother Teresa was a saint, but she was uncool, right? You would say Barack Obama is cool, but Nelson Mandela, yeah, he was a reformist. He was not cool. To care does not feel badass enough. To be a Sid Vicious is really cool. To be a Jim Morrison is really cool. But for your generation, I would say to be a Ranveer Singh is really cool. But a Randeep Hooda who cares about horses or about a Haryanvi village, not so cool, right? So same logic applies to the planet, where anyone who cares for the planet is either an urban creative hippie who has too much time in their hands and no life appropriate adulting mechanisms in place, right? That's one narrative, right? That you're 35, you've got what you're calling a pet, your baby, you're calling yourself a pet mother, pet father, you don't have a house, what are you, right? And then you're going around and saving trees, and you're doing a community drive, and so you're seen as an urban hippie, and then there are these people you easily very derogatively bracket as uncles and aunties who are part of clubs like Protract or Lions Club, and they are doing their little tree planting or their little save the forest or save the lake. So there is a huge chasm between the ones who are doing stuff and the ones who actually could do something on a small everyday basis, but who don't care because who cares? There's something way more cooler, way more fun on TikTok or on Instagram, or I'm too busy showing the world that I'm out at the best, hippest, most badass party joint, but I am not. My feed can't be polluted with pictures of me, going on a lake cleanup. That's the majority. There are people who do it. I'm saying those are the urban hippies. If I go on a trek, I don't bother to carry a bag to carry someone else's trash bag because it's really uncool in an Indian context. I'm talking about all of this from an Indian context. So that's the general lay of the land, right? So if I have to recap, just for your comfort, then the problem is larger than the human individual. And we're talking only within the context of the environment, the ecology, and the circular environment, circular economy conversation that comes from these two vectors of business growth and business development. So the problem is bigger than the individual. The perfect crime is where the victim lives in the future. So social structures over-index on blame over claim. Good habits have been replaced by terrible ones. We have learned as a society to pass the buck downwards generationally for many centuries, and badassery is the attitude to embrace. So how do you behavior hack this loop of behavior that we have in society? How do you hack? There's no one solution, and there is no one solution that's one size fit all, clearly. But we will look at some of the things that could potentially be interesting for this conversation. And the idea is to actually open your minds out in this discussion that I'm having with you, or rather this monologue I'm having with you. These are things that need to be curated. So whoever is running whatever startup initiative, you will need to take cognizance of what I'm talking to you today and what Kavin and I will discuss a little later today. And then you will have to craft out from the problem that you're solving within the circular economy, and then see how where the gaps are for you in your understanding, or where the opportunities are, and how you see these points kind of fit into the narrative that you're building, or how they are complementing the narrative you're building. Yes. So how do we hack the behavior? One of of the most important things that I would like to, and I would assume a lot of you are science students, the idea of a resonant frequency within society is something I keep talking about very intimately wherever I go, right? Resonant frequency is basically the highest frequency where is the frequency where everybody resonates at the highest amplitude, right? So where is that as a society? There are, in my observation, in my thesis, it just falls on two vectors that we over-index on in society, and therefore you get that resonant frequency. Is we all, as a human race, in the evolutionary arc that we are in today, we are at a place where we are united by two opposing forces. One is we seek convenience as a prerogative. Second is we want to shirk responsibility. By shirk, I mean we want to vindicate ourselves of responsibility. It's not my responsibility, right? And again, when I say this, what I'm saying is that there is a Western normative narrative. So if you say, the Caucasians or the Americans or the Australians or the Japanese, people who have traditionally led industries, policies, decision making, and set the norms, right? The cultural bend of the people there, because they have lesser density of population in most of the countries, what ends up happening is that these rules that I'm saying here as resonant frequency, when you look at the developed West, those rules change. But when you're looking at the developing Asian economies, which is where we are operating on, and with a direct lens on India, then what you're seeing are these two counterpoints to the frequency curve. And one is convenience seeking, and the other one is I want to shirk responsibility. It's not my problem. If I'm an MLA, and if my legislature is one small area, what happens in the area 2 streets down is not my problem, right? So there you as a genetic makeup, we have learned, and it's a high science for us, to identify gaps from where we can shirk responsibility. And we have also learned to identify pockets in which we can find and settle into comfortable patterns of behavior. We need to break this. So how do you break this, and how do you bring that broken change to scale within the gap of one generation? So if you see generations, if you see, okay, right now, the leading generation is Gen Z, I'm sorry. The leading generation is Gen Z, which means the generation that has entered the productive working age and is going to be working for the next 20 years to see the scale through of anything. You have the alpha generation that is getting ready, which is the sub 18, 14 actually, generation that is getting ready now. So what will happen is Gen Z has to be the one that you drive for change, because they are the generation that is going to take the next 20 years forward. Yeah. But whatever you do with Gen Z, you're going to have to bring alpha generation, which is my son's generation. I have an 11-year-old. So my son's generation needs to find the message, the context need to be tailored to the other generation as well. But the ones that you need to break this mashup that we have around the circular economy, the change agents will be the Gen Z generation. So how do you bring change at scale? One is you have to make a solid effort at implementing discipline. And what do I mean by implementing discipline is that a habit, like I said earlier, where you've created a habit and you're breaking that habit. So if you see Gen Zs, they're already breaking a lot of these habits, because when they say we don't want to be working 9 to 5, right? Which is never 9 to 5, it's 9 to 9. We don't want to commute. We don't care too much for you and your authority and your the hierarchical structures that you have built. When they say these things, and when society looks at it in isolation, it sounds like performative rebellion. That's how it sounds like. But when you look at it within the context of what is happening on a larger level, the cultural, the socio-economic, and the ecological conversation, when you map them against the behavior, the Gen Zs are on the right track. So they are able to, so do they have discipline? They have discipline, because if a Gen Z comes in and says, look, I don't want to go and work for a JP Morgan anymore. Yeah, I don't want to work for a Ford Motor Companies anymore. What are they doing then? They are finding their own ways to become productive, have better life choice, make better life choices. So they are, they're not rushing into the life stage conversations that say the Gen Xers were forced into. So they're not going out and buying houses and cars, or they're not going out and getting married. So they are breaking those behavioral cycles. They have already hacked those behavioral cycles. Now, all you need to do is create a chain of discipline around the behavioral cycles that you have built as a model. And you need to make rigor fun. So when you're doing so when you have discipline and rigor, these are very, when I say discipline and rigor, the words trigger, military training, right? Shloka narration, where you have a figure of authority who puts you through this repetitive loop that bypasses your comfort-seeking behavior and forces you into a behavior that will create rigor and discipline in you, right? The change we need to do is make it a fun default and not make it so authoritative and boring and rigorous, right? The second aspect to the change at scale is going to be, you take the need to slack off and you turn it into an earned benefit. You give them the benefit of earning it. So in the case of the chocolate and the ice cream in the past, what I would tell my son is, okay, Damien, his name is Damien. I would tell him, Damien, you can have the ice cream, but it's late in the night. So I would like you to have the ice cream tomorrow post noon. And if you hold off having the ice cream till tomorrow post noon, because it's monsoons and it's not good for you to have ice cream in the night. What I would then say is that later in the evening, if you feel like it, you're allowed a chocolate bar later, provided you brush your teeth. So the ability to earn that benefit helps form a new neurological pattern in the brain. And then you can reinforce it enough for it to become self-reliant and to stand on its own feet without you having to incentivize the behavior anymore, right? Pavlovian behavior. If you know the Pavlovian dog story, then you don't need the bell anymore to train the dog to salivate when the meat is put out. So you can hack that behavioral cycle. I just like that picture that I had used earlier because going out in the sun is great fun, and staying out in the sun all day is great fun. Especially for Caucasian and the other paler skinned races, but sunburn is real. So make sunscreen the fun option. So you own and propagate, say, spring break. If I'm a sunscreen advocate, if I'm a Nivea kind of a product line sunblock advocate, then I will throw parties where people are out in the sun the whole day, but I will throw them with sunblock, holding the event and making sure people are wearing sunblock, else you'll end up looking like the guy in the picture. So, the need to be light-hearted, fun, relevant, but irreverent is going to be very important to get the tone right for change of a larger scale. Now, when you look at society and when you see modern society and how we have changed a few vectors, these are some 6 examples. The last one is the latest example that we have seen. The one in the top middle is an example you will see in your cities. If you are a dog pet owner or you're walking dogs or you see neighbors walking dogs, poopy bags have now become the polite, respectful way to be a pet owner, right? Why do we have marked out exit signs? Why do we have traffic lights? Why do we form queues? Why do horses have blinkers when they run? These are all small little ways to nudge people in the right direction of movement, while not enforcing it from authority, while not making it about authority, but making it about ease and convenience for you, and just getting things out of the way faster. Yeah. So I want to look at a few cases of behavior modifiers. And I know I've been speaking for a long time, so I thought it would be a good idea to have a couple of videos to break up the monotony of me speaking. What I'm going to do is show you a few videos as well, but I'm going to play only small clips, because otherwise the videos make for really long viewable content. But here we go. So this one. This is obviously a prank, but it's a beautiful example, because what happens is, this is the same thing that happens in schools. It's the same thing that drill masters do. In order to keep the many in line, you punish one. You may mock punish one, but the minute you punish one, 95 fall in line. So this is a funny, just for laughs kind of a flyer handover video where, I just found it really hilarious, and I thought I should play this for you. But while there is a lot of laughability to the video, there is a hidden kernel of truth to it. That when one gets punished, which is why, if you know, in some of the more authoritarian, dogmatic regimes of this world, for example, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia comes to mind, where anyone who has visited the Saudi, or anyone who has spoken of the Saudi and the laws there, they speak about how, when you're driving through the streets, you'll see someone's hand hanging, someone's, some body part hanging, and serves as a cautionary tale. And this is actually, while we in modern society consider it barbaric, but modern societies of every time, whether it was the medieval period, whether it was Renaissance, whether it was the Dark Ages, or whether it was just the whole, the Romantic period, every city-state always had an outside area where, you had a beheaded, staked body. Vlad the Impaler was a perfect example, who I think existed in the 1100s time zone of AD time zone of our known history. He's very well known for having done that. So you deter by showing an example of what not to get done. That is an extreme example, but the video was fun.
Like you have a marketing problem. And I had the same conversation with the libertarians when we had the Libertarian Roundtable debate. They have all these amazing ideas, but nothing breaks through because none of their candidates are charismatic, or nobody's listening to them. So I'm going to throw something your way. And
by the way, I agree with you on that analysis.
Okay. Well, thank you. So
I am a country boy from the north of Vancouver Island with a science PhD, and I know how to write about it and talk about it.
Well, let's say you are absolutely correct. Is it fair to say that you're not a fan of the New Green Deal? Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Okay, so we'll go there. Is it fair to say that you're not a fan of the Paris Climate Accord? Is that fair to say? Okay, I'm just painting a picture for you. So, but you know who is? Okay, and I'm just going to go down some names here and just throw them out there. This will get to my point of the question about the marketing problem. We all know Greta Thunberg, 16-year-old girl, whatever, maybe she's 18 now. You got Leonardo DiCaprio, you got Al Gore, you have Pharrell, Robert Redford, Mark Ruffalo, Joaquin Phoenix.
So I'm not going to play the rest of it because it's really long. It's a beautiful debate, and if you would like it, you should watch it because it'll throw insights for you. Basically, what they're saying is there are two groups, two camps, right? One camp says, this is bad. The other camp says, no, this is bad, right? Both are not seeing eye to eye. The difference is this camp has ponied up with celebrities. And this camp is loaded with academicians, and they're boring, and they are yawn, right? So the moderator basically says, look, you guys are making a great point. What you're saying makes sense. However, you're losing out because this camp has star power, this camp has celebrities, and all the celebrities are saying what they're saying. So how are you going to counteract this? And that's the whole discussion. So it's a fascinating conversation in the evolved West, where normative discussions have taken a different shape and form and scale. But it's important and relevant to our discussion today that star power lends a lot of credibility to actionable, measurable action. Yeah. So who's star power? What is star power? Are we talking celebrities? Are we talking sports people? Are we talking industrialists? Are we talking startup founders? You know, these are kind of discussions you will need to ask yourself. And kind of, if you can make borderline notes right now, and maybe during Q&A, we can field a few of those. Just look at how all these points kind of correlate to your own startup initiative. This is an interesting one for me personally, because this is from my social experiment. So when my son was younger, what would happen is, see, I was a behavior scientist ever since I was 14. It's been a passion area for me since I was 14, because I was trying to hack the society around me. But and I was trying to understand people and you know, have an outsider perspective along with an insider view. And then when I chose that as a professional space for myself, my practice was limited to brands, marketing, convincing customers to buy more, or convincing customers to buy better or cheaper or faster or stronger. But the minute I became a mother, my behavior science practice for myself in my own head, and I'm an applied scientist, I'm not a theoretical scientist. So what happens is when you become a parent, you know, it's like you become a PhD, right? Because you're seeing it from, so you have a test subject and you're a test cohort that behaves different. So if you take society and you break down society's intelligence and its inclinations and its competence, what ends up happening is you have a spectrum. There is a bottom end of the spectrum which does repetitive work, right? Which does instructed work. And your children, when they start younger, when they are in the age of 1 to 10, they fall in the same kind of socio-intelligence patterns. They manipulate you. They don't want to follow. They don't want to have discipline. They can only do so many things, and if you overwhelm them, their circuits break down. They shut down. They rebel. You know, your workers will go on strike on a union. Children will rebel and throw a tantrum. So there's a lot of mappable similarities that you start seeing. So for me, when I noticed that my son was at an age where I could not give him fever medication beyond an age, you know, after the age of 4.5, it becomes very hard. You can't put suppositories into baby. You know, what you could do earlier, you could not do anymore, because the child is now self-aware and aware of the body. You have taught the child to become aware of the body. So what ends up happening is so then there was I reached a stage where the doctors were saying, give him syrup. He hated the idea of syrup, though he loved other things, but he couldn't handle the idea of syrup. So I said, okay, you know what, buddy, you don't want to do syrups, that's fine. But what we will do is we're going to become, we're going to grow up. We're going to be big boy, and we're going to do tablets, right? That's only for big boys, and it's not at all age appropriate, but, you've got to be really, like, if you're a really, really awesome kid, maybe you'll manage it, right? So he was like, yeah, okay. And these tablets are bitter. When you pop them for the first time, it leaves if it touches your tongue, it's very bitter. As you get older, you get acclimatized to the taste and it doesn't bother you anymore. But as a child, it's very sharp. So to make sure that I didn't have to find a third alternative, what I did was I took a Crocin and I took a Panadol, same strength, and I broke them. And I gave him an option. I gave him a choice. It was a closed loop choice. I said, you can try, and you can pick the one that works for you. And we'll do this over the next 2 days. Is you either take half a cylinder or you take a semicircle, right? And you go with whatever you think goes down best. So when I gave him that, then it became a fun default way to. So he was So he went into wanting to play me. So he thought he would choose the semicircle, but he chose the semi-cylinder. And then he felt very big and grown up about the fact that in his own head that he's hacked 3 years of developmental curve, and he's doing what an 8-year-old boy would do now. So you close the loop and you engineer the choice. Yeah. Another interesting thing that you could do, and an interesting thing that I have observed, is you doctor a cheat. You build in the cheat, right? My son, again, I would tell him, we have 5 days of meal that I need to prep for you for school, right? So 5 days, I need you to have lunch, which I will pack you. And I will not repeat lunch at all. However, one day, so you will have one day, so every day there is a snack, but one day I will give you a lunch that you want. You tell me what you want and what will give you joy to eat that day, and I will give. So someday he will tell me, Amma, I want chicken biryani. So I will doctor in a cheat day where I've made chicken biryani. And that day I will send him biryani for the whole, like 10 of them to eat together. So he's, you know, there's something to look forward to. And therefore the other 4 days become a breeze, right? The behavior I observed in a larger scale was when I went to Raffles Hotel in Singapore. And Singapore is a city that doesn't allow you to litter. Raffles Hotel is where they created the Singapore Sling drink, if you know Singapore Sling. It's famous for Singapore Sling. It's a pink cocktail drink. And that's where Somerset Maugham and the other writers of British colonial times would go to the Raffles Hotel and write. And I'm a writer, so for me to go there was iconic. But what really stayed with me was they actually order bags of peanuts, you know, the moongfali, which we break and eat. So they order bags of peanuts and they serve you bags of peanuts with whatever your drink is, not just the Singapore Sling. And they don't give you a waste bin. You throw the peanut shells on the floor. And because you can't litter anywhere else in Singapore, the fact that you can throw shells on the floor gives you the ability to feel in control of a cheat, right? You're cheating. The harder option, make it the easier option. You know, make it the default setting. So if you're ordering on Swiggy and if Swiggy says 5 rupees tip, you know, or tea tip for your driver as the default option, and then you need to remove the default option versus saying 5 rupee, 10 rupee, 20 rupee, 30 rupee, chances are, and if it said tip him a tea, right? Chances are you will pick that option. If it's a default option, buy him a tea. If you're placed an order, buy your delivery guy a tea. You don't have that option right now. People will click it. 5 rupee tea se kya jata hai, right? So make the harder option, which normally they would not have paid out 5 rupees, but make it the easier option. Now, this is a creative option that I'm telling you. The straight way that a Swiggy would approach this is to say 5 rupees, 10 rupees, 20 rupees, 30 rupees. Now, that's where I come in, right? That's where my practice comes in, where we find the right human vein and we find the right message, the most effective message carrier, and then we hack the process for the most effective delivery. So we apply creativity to business problems. So IKEA does that very well, where they make it harder for you to buy an assemblage service than to assemble it yourself at your house. You need to shorten the whiplash. Goa has got a huge problem today of litter in the beach and stuff. There is a lot of conversation. There's a lot of, you know, legislative posturing, but to actually see action means that the government is going to need to enforce and bring the whiplash closer in, you know, and tighter in. Every day there is monitoring. So for a year, if you do that, behavior gets hacked. Do not do it like how Bangalore traffic cops do their enforcement for the traffic challans. They do it like maniacs, so that we all hate them. And there's a reason for it. Because when you monitor like a maniac and you create this vigilance net around drivers and pedestrians, then they are always having you as a watchdog on their shoulder every time they step out, which is what needs to be done to shorten the whiplash. Finally, shame them. Nothing works, just shame them. Greta Thunberg caught this really well and had everyone's imagination for a year and then she's gone. But that's another thing. I'm going to start closing this because, you know, I've kind of run out of time. But we need to move together ahead and we need to move from individualism to collectivism. How do you promote collectivism? Just as I was mentioning, I'm just recapping them. The default option needs to be transformed. You need to become an architect of choice. You need to ban certain things outright. You need to reduce the hassle of being circular. Right now, being linear is the easier option. You need to reduce the option to be circular. The hassles of being circular need to become less of a problem. And you need to tailor the message by the socioeconomic cohort. Yeah, so where you are in the social strata and what you're saying, they have to be tailored according to different people. This is the last thing I want to leave you with. I'm going to give you context because this is a long video. Basically, every time there is poverty porn out of Africa, everyone sees, everyone feels bad. There is a not-for-profit organization. I'm sorry, I seem to have missed my place. There is a not-for-profit organization where what they've done is, okay, I'm sorry, excuse me. Let's see if this works.
It's not.
I'm gonna let you see that video for yourselves, but basically it's an easy way to donate. What they said was so there is a light box from where
the relief organization has been creating self-help initiatives for the third world in the fight against.
Yeah, so that's the organization.
The simple solution, the one thing that people always have with them, a credit card. Last year, over 40% of all payments in Europe were made with one. With this in mind, NSERCEL developed the social swipe, the first poster that accepts credit cards. The poster makes giving easier than ever before, and you can see the results.
That's
Your
it.
donation can provide
Yeah.
daily bread.
So they've hacked the delivery mechanism of the donation, right? So that's a very creative way to, and this is where, so when you're talking about the circular economy, you need more creative people coming in, because the problem is with linear thinking, you can't solve circular problems. You need minds that are neurodivergent to come in and see different perspectives. So make it cool to be collectivistic. So what I want to do is now just jump over quickly to Kavin. Kavin runs Proclaim, and of all the pitches that I have heard from people who work with the climate or people who work with the environment, Kavin's is a very straight, clear, direct message, which you will hear from him now. So Kavin, you're on mute.
Hi.
Hi.
And I'm a student, so I'm listening in.
Kavin, you and I have a lot of conversations, and I know you have a flight to catch and you have a hard stop. There are a few questions I have for you. First is if you could just, in your own words, talk to the batch about what Proclaim does and what your USP is, your value proposition is.
Super. Thanks, Ronnie, and thanks, Ashna, for having me. First, Proclaim is a climate company. Now, a lot of people do not know climate can be classified as an industry. It falls under environmental sustainability, but climate needs to be seen as a separate industry. Now, when you're looking at problems that plague the world, if you can find one or two problems that are common, irrespective of the geography you live in and the color of your skin, climate is right up there, right? You have so many other problems out there from education and so forth, so on and so forth, but then climate is up there. And if you look at world consensus, that everybody agrees that this is a problem and this needs to be addressed, climate is up there, right? But then having understood that this is a common problem, a lot of people were still not acting upon it with the same amount of urgency it needed to be shown, because there are important issues and then there are urgent issues. Climate is urgent. So we started talking to a lot of people about this and saying our companies have pledges, governments have, mandates and all of this, but then the action was very poor. So we came up with a very simple notion. If climate can be profitable and not looked upon as a charity cause, climate will survive on the merit of its own profits. So we told people when nobody was willing to listen to us in the early stages, we were saying, hey, climate needs to be worked on. We started telling politicians, climate is profitable. And it's true. For the first time ever in as many years as since the industrial revolution, same amount of investments have gone into clean climate, green energy, as much as has gone into fossil-based fuels and other pollutant, industries. $1.2 trillion have gone in only in 2022 into the clean space. And climate has become profitable, which means the curve is on an uptick. So ProClime does three things in this space. We do carbon projects, which helps you understand that every time you reduce emissions of some nature or you avoid emissions of some nature, we can monetize it for you because the world agrees that polluters need to pay those people who can reduce or avoid these emissions. So any project that is involved in monetizing the climate revenues is a carbon project for us. So ProClime does carbon projects. The second thing ProClime does is carbon trade. And when I say trade, in carbon projects, we curate our own projects. In carbon trade, we work on other projects where we enable them to be registered on certain platforms with all the validations that are necessary. And we find, the monetization for such projects, so carbon trade. The third thing we do is climate investments. We invest in technologies and projects of scale that reduce emissions and decarbonize the world as we know it. So ProClime is in carbon projects, carbon trade, and climate investments. And our simple notion is to help everybody understand climate is profitable. And as you did mention earlier, the power of greed is to ask for more of something without, even needing it in the first place. Profits are something that people want to just maximize beyond their need. And if you can bring the power of the markets to the climate opportunity, then climate can be addressed as an urgent matter, and only the power of the markets can solve the climate crisis. So climate is an opportunity. So I hope this helps you sort of understand the ethos. I mean, there's high integrity we put in all these projects. We work with multiple state governments. We work with the government of Sri Lanka as well. We work with other national governments. We work with large corporate houses. And we typically say we work with 7 stakeholders: policy, politics, business, finance, tech, society, and media. We work with these 7 stakeholders to influence the climate space. And you need all of these people to come together to make climate action possible. And, if there is any industry out there that is of real scale, since, even gold, it's climate. It's an $8 trillion opportunity. It needs to be addressed. And money needs to go into it, and money is going into it. We'd love for more people to come and be a part of it. Over to you.
So, Kavin, the larger question I always grapple with is political will and bureaucratic empowerment when it comes to things that may not necessarily directly impact the vote bank.
Mm-hmm.
The climate. See, when you look at certain platforms and campaigns that governments put out in developing markets, because in developing markets, versus developed markets, governments are structured differently. So when you look at everywhere governments are driven by legislative will and driven by bureaucratic efficiency. In India, what have you noticed? What have you observed? Where are we? Where should we be? And how can we get there faster?
This goes back to fundamentally what I told you before. One is to be aware of the problem and the urgency of the problem, right? And climate is a problem that is of urgent nature. And India has something, I mean, the whole world has something called the Climate Vulnerability Index. And if you take a look at the Indian map, about 70% of India is on a climate vulnerability index at a threshold that needs immediate action, right? Now, our first job was to help these politicians and bureaucrats understand that this is something that needs to be on their roster. It needs to be a part of the mandate. And once we did, we gave them a projection as to if it was not addressed, how much of an economic imbalance it can create in about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and 30 years from now, if the models exist. Once you do something like that, it sort of hits them that it's a now or never situation rather than now or later, right? And that is where we drive in the urgency. And once the urgency is in, you will have a lot of passionate people say, I'm going to do something about this. And I've had conversations with chief ministers of multiple states where I didn't have to enlighten them about the problem. I just had to enlighten them about the urgency of the problem and the scale of the impact it's going to have, right? And once you're able to tell them about the urgency and the scale of the impact, then it really does dawn upon them that something needs to be done about it right now. And the next question is, where are the resources? All right, do we have the resources? Because this is not a problem that the larger Indian market is very much aware of, is what they think. But wrong. Climate is at your doorstep. Farmers are having erratic weather patterns, right? I mean, coffee is blossoming later in the foothills of, in the Yercaud hill station. It's blossoming 45 days later. So people don't understand how to even plan the harvest cycles anymore, right? And there are so many other resources that are becoming more scarce and more erratic, where dependability and discipline is lost. And one of the fundamental things you were speaking about is when you lose discipline, chaos kicks in, and then it becomes a free-flowing market. And free-flowing markets are not good for governments, right? I mean, not in the sense that free market is not good, but a market that cannot be structured is not good. So all of these factors, when you bring it to their attention, it helps them understand that this needs to be done. And there are enough resources out there, Ronnie, that is available and at the disposal of these government systems that needs to be accessed, and they're not aware of it. So ProClimb goes in and does provide all the work that is necessary. So once the problem is understood, once the intent is very clear, once the scale of the impact is very well understood, the question is, how do I act? Most often it comes down to financial limitations. And that is exactly why we were very keen on letting people know climate is profitable. And we don't flinch in saying it, because profits are always frowned upon when done on a government scale. But forgive me, if you want to sustain something, you might as well do it with what going in needs to be, what comes out needs to be higher than what's going in. So, they can sustain these operations. And that's exactly why it's working for us now.
Fantastic. Kavan, you have found a fabulous handle on hacking the thinking that governments and bureaucrats or legislators would carry into a conversation. The minute you say climate is profitable, the human basal need to make a killing in a lifetime gets activated. They feel, yeah, now I can make a killing in climate, right? What would you say would be similar ways that people who are in the circular economy initiative within this program, what would you think they can do to open their own thinking for their own initiatives when it comes to talking to governments and industry bodies in order to scale up from wherever they are? Because a lot of times what happens is if you are in the circular economy, you have initial adoption, you can show initial numbers, and so what's interesting for me, and the reason I'm asking this question, is because when you have investors and the investors' typical KPIs of a startup, in the case of a circular economy, fall flat on the face very quickly, because the challenge becomes adoption at scale. Challenge becomes making sure that the cycle of procurement to processed item going out, that cycle is a perpetual loop, right? What would you recommend, or would you have any thoughts on how this batch can benefit from your experience of talking to governments and to
Yeah.
bureaucrats?
First thing, science doesn't sell.
Science doesn't
Heart,
sell.
I mean, science doesn't sell. Heart and passion does. When you go in with fancy reports, people will not listen to you as much as the power of a compelling story. Build a strong narrative, right? I mean, you can't address all stakeholders with one story. You'll have to tweak the story in alignment with what is the highest expectation for them. I speak very differently to the politicians. I speak very differently to the bureaucrats. But the fabric is the same. I speak very differently to the business heads and the finance teams. The guys who, the banks, the investors who are putting money on this. The technology guy is only concerned about his product being successful. Nothing that, is this decarbonization methodology going to work? That's it. That's all. They're not even worried about them being able to tell the story. So first thing is, please build a compelling story, and make sure that you're not repeating the same thing to everybody. You'll have to alter it based on your audience. And it is very, 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 very important. One of the first lessons I learned is there's no point in me telling this to a minister, to a bureaucrat. The same story, it has to be a little different in terms of what sort of impact it's going to have in their realm of influence, right? Second thing that, I would come back and, tell all of you is, even though your product could be niche, show them promise of scale. Even if it doesn't exist right now, show them promise of scale. Because all of them want to see scale, whether it happens or not, and they need to know that your product is scalable, even if you haven't figured out how. And I'm sure you will evolve to figuring it out. Some of the solutions we have, we don't know yet as to what sort of scale it can hit. But then we continue to pursue it with absolute determination as long as we know the method works. And then we keep plowing through. So when people go through umpteen number of scientific calculations and then stay in the labs for 10 years and 15 years, the problem that you were trying to solve, the solution becomes irrelevant. We go rapidly to the market and then we test it and then we understand if it's working, test it on a larger audience, test it on more, test it on more. Eventually, the methods sort of starts falling in place with the power of the market. This might sound wrong to academicians, but then this is what works for us. Sometimes when they say, hey, waste, this thing is not going to work, pyrolysis is not going to work, and this is why it's not going to work. Okay, we say, can we do it on a small scale, small batch, that way the negative impacts are not going to hurt anybody? And then we try and push through something like this, and then we start building on it rapidly in the market itself. And we've done that for a large biomining project where we've started extracting fuel from all the reduce derived, RDF is some of the guys who are from the waste industry will understand this. These are things that you cannot extract any further value on, right? Now, you have to start just, exploring with the market without sitting back on the drawing board too very often. And then you have to really, the last thing that I can sort of tell, all of you, and it's be very geographic specific. Sometimes you just can't take something from the Western world and come here and say it's going to work in India now. What works in Tamil Nadu doesn't work in Kerala. The organic waste content in Kerala is much higher than most of the parts of the country. And the same waste process that somebody tried deploying there and we were doing a carbon methodology on it, didn't work. And they were asking, saying, hey, why is the yield not so high? Because you have to be very geographic specific, right? So that's very important. And India is like multiple countries put together. And just one Western methodology coming here. We tried one German technique, came to India for, again, in the circular economy, the machines just conked out. And so much for German engineering then. Somebody else had to re-engineer the whole thing over here. It took them 2-3 years. It's working well now. So these are lessons we learned from the market. So out of experience in no specific order, story is very important. Then showing to the market that it can be done is very important. And then scale can be built, as long as there is a promise of scale somewhere, there's a hope of scale somewhere. And then being very specific to that market is very important.
Awesome. Mitali had just asked a question on the group, which I said your answer right now just sort of bookended it. Priyanka, on the matter of advertising and sustainable practices for businesses, there are 2-3 things that you can come together. One is you can talk to ad clubs, you can talk to Curious Design Awards and to forums like Times of India, and write in and ask them to create a category which is on environment, on sustainability. The minute they create a category for the awards, and it's very easy these days. You start a Twitter poll, get everyone behind it. Get your head of office. In fact, I always tend to see that head of offices have enough ability to move and galvanize. So, put a petition through your organization, get a few of you together, ask for a category to be created within the awards circles, FEs, get into FEs, and then partner up with your clients and say, for example, I used to work with ITC Foods. When I used to work with them, when I started working with them 5 years ago, I worked with them for 2.5 years. I led their business. And I used to speak to the CEO, and the conversation I used to have with him is, when do you move from plastic packaging into more sustainable container driven? Because, there was a lot of small trend lines that were happening and people were experimenting, but to move on a mass scale where you are moving your manufacturing and your assembly line processes, you can't jump the gun and you can't buck a trend. You can't overinvest and you can't pass the expenses to the customer yet. So there are some of those challenges. But if there is, like Kavin said earlier, which I thought was wonderful, is it's about storytelling. So if you can find a client in your roster who is looking to tell better, sustainable, climate positive initiatives that they're doing. So they may be doing something through CSR, they may be doing something through packaging. But if there is a conversation that you have with them saying, look, we would like to bring this to the forefront, with or without media money, I think that's a great place to start. It can be as simple as running their Twitter handles or their Instagram handles and starting the story from there. Don't think big, don't think too big, too scale. You scale once you get a pilot and you get a minimum viable product going. So good luck with that. Any other questions for Kavin? Any other questions that you may have? Because he has a hard stop and I am cognizant of it.
I have been free. I've been responding to a lot of the questions as you were presenting. But there's one question somebody asked about EVs and, petrol engines. I have responded, but then I'd like you to know, this is going back to what you were talking about, Ronnie, is sometimes the investments that go into electric vehicles, and somebody's like, hey, listen, electric vehicles pollute the same amount as well, but then they do deplete over time. The longer you use an electric vehicle, then they sort of tally out, and after that they become climate positive. But these are the certain, some of the other messaging that needs to get out there. So I have responded to whatever questions that have been out there.
Fantastic. So, to your question, Sadnik, see, my only 2 bits on this is this, that when I say that you need to break some habits, I mean that we need to, and that whole badass factor, right? Like, I'm going to MG Road. I live in Bangalore. I'm going to MG Road to buy a book in Blossoms. Yeah. So I'm going to take a car. I'm going to drive my car. I'm going to go find parking, and it's all wasted. It's one car. There's AC running, and I'm driving. And then I go, I park, I pay a parking meter, and then I buy a book. That's just one day in the life of, right? One moment in the life of. Now, can I look at my own map and say it's 4 kilometers away? I need a walk. I'm not going to turn on a treadmill. I'm going to just walk it up to MG Road, pick up a book, and walk back, because I've gotten my day's walk in. I can wear my shoes and I can run. My larger point is that there are tiers to this conversation. There is an industry and there is a global economic, socio-political, economical narrative attached to large industries, right? You can't take that away, and that machinery takes time to turn. There are certain test markets, and then there are certain adoption markets. India is an adoption market. But when you look at from a individual person, which is where I was saying earlier also, that Europe behaves very differently culturally than we do. They bicycle, right? Europe, Amsterdam bicycles. Their last mile is bicycling. India, if you bicycle, you're seen as a lucha local who can't afford a bike. So how do you move your own individual thinking? Can you walk? Can you cycle? Can you take a public transport? There are electric vehicle buses that are running. The government is making investments in. Tata has just supplied 80 buses to Bangalore, BMTC. Can we move to practices? So I think the question is a matter of personal relevance and what you can do on an individual level so that you can aid what the governments and the legislative bodies are doing, and you're not congruent to the conversation. So everything, and you're very right? So if you put, I've actually got an analysis of the cost of ownership and the cost of manufacture of a IC engine vehicle versus a electric vehicle. The costs pretty much run in the same kind of carbon footprint. So while there is a lot of, so some things are poster children, some businesses are poster children for larger change. So you should at the end level, you should identify for yourself what you can do to turn it from just a poster child to a more sustainable practice. Can we as a generation make it cool to go bicycling again? If you reduce vehicular pollution and traffic, if more cool girls and boys and men and women are taking the bicycle for a half a kilometer, kind of a commute back and forth. It's also the first few people may feel awkward. If you're not a hardcore bicycling enthusiast, you're just la-di-da ladybirding around town, then you may feel awkward about it. But the sooner you break that awkward feeling and the more friends you get into it, and the faster we become a collectivistic society, the change becomes so much. So you're not going, it's not incremental, right? Then change is not incremental. Then change is exponential. I hope that answers the question. Any other questions that you may have?
There are about 7 questions that have come into the chat box, and maybe if we can just run through them. Yeah, would you like me to read out and just answer, if that makes sense?
How do you convince the managements of organizations to not sell their waste scrap to different kinds of vendors or suppliers, but instead to repurpose it? The value they will get from repurposing it themselves. And then it also gives the rest to us to create a more value out of the waste through a cost.
Okay, first things, thank you, Shilpa. One, do the organizations have the know-how to repurpose their waste? That is a simple question, right? It's easy for them to discard it in a place which is not, and without being compliant, or they compliantly dispose it and hand it over to a waste management organization. So that is a better position. I mean, that's a better solution, and it's a scalable solution. And if we want organizations to repurpose their waste, at this point, you have a very uphill task. I'd rather take this win, which has more specialized impact with the waste management companies handling it, rather than organizations having to figure that out. And right now, having them do all of this might not be a win for us. So, it's best to just hand it over to the waste management organizations. Hope that helps. Maybe you're not convinced, but then it's more scalable. Yeah.
No, and you're right, because it's also about investing in competence, in these kind of factors. And I'm going back to what you said earlier about, you had said if the product is niche, then show them promise through scale, right? That it can be scaled. And how you were talking about how you go into these little small projects, pilot projects, in order to show proof of concept. And when you are talking about things like waste recycling and sorting, and these are large investments that one needs to make. And it's good to build competence in it over a period of time, and therefore have one sorting center, one recycling center that everyone sends it to, where then you can also standardize practices.
Absolutely. And these are ecosystem building that we're talking about, rather than having everybody do everything. So Sagnik, thank you. That's good. That's the EB question, I believe. So Archana Tomar, how have you engaged?
Question about how have you engaged communities actively and identify solutions? Often they are left out of these essentials. So how do you identify and engage communities for solutioning, right?
Firstly, when you look at nature-based solutions, which we're working a lot on, because nature is one of the best decarbonizing tools out there, that is agroforestry, forestry, agricultural practices. all of these will not be successful without without the successful integration of the communities itself. So we have a community engagement associate and expert in our team that goes in advance to the communities that we're targeting, enlightens them about the possibility of the impact that they might have by these projects taking off over there. We also factor them in our planning to have a revenue sharing on the successful completion of the project, and provided that a climate revenue is coming out, we also engage them in that. And when we do all of this, the communities also work on sustaining the project. Sorry, it's embarrassing, but I have to let the hotel guys are just ringing. Just give me a second, please. I'll just let them know.
Take your time. I will answer another question in the meanwhile. I'm just going to skip through. I'm Anita Shankar, founder of Astu, Eco, working on providing sustainable solutions to customers and consumers and businesses. We have ClimeTech Digital ID, which gives real-time impact metrics. How can you and ProClime help us convert the metrics into profitability as carbon credits? Yeah, Anita, I think this is something that Kavin can come back and answer. I'm going to bring this back to him for his attention. But we can definitely discuss this offline. Maybe if Ashna, if you could, make Kavin, Anita's last question, the last question.
I was listening to it, so my apologies. Had to run out and let them know that, I promised them a checkout at 12:30, so they were just checking in. I have time. So how do you get people to accept? I'm sorry, Anita,
where she's saying, we have Climate Tech Digital ID that gives real-time impact metrics. How can ProClime help us
convert the metrics into profitability? It's a methodology, Anita. It's very technical, right? So as long as there's this issue about double counting and the whole thing about a digital twin, once you remove 1 ton of emission from the atmosphere, you don't want 2 people taking credit for it. So, the fact that you can come up with a, digital ID, whether it is fungible, all of those questions come into play. And we're working with multiple partners. And if you feel your solution is good and you'd like market access, we'd be happy to talk to you and see if this is a solution that will work in the real world applications that we have ongoing at that point. So I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. I'm going to quickly see, there is a new age tech. So Prashant asks, new age tech is creating a lot of emissions, CO2 emissions. Is there a measurement solution that can provide data and solutions to control the usage? So basically, how are people measuring and how are they monitoring and either punishing or rewarding for carbon credits in big tech?
So first, I'll have to dissect the question in so many different ways because it's very broad. All processes out there have some sort of emission at this point. Anything, even renewable energy has some sort of emission. And there are enough tools and methodologies in place to measure your emissions right now. And for example, green hydrogen, I'm one of the founding directors for Green Hydrogen Organization in India. Green Hydrogen Organization very specifically says for every ton of hydrogen we produce, you have to produce lesser than 1 ton of emissions. So over the long, gestation of the projects itself, you'll be continuously reducing more emissions because emission production is going to happen whether you like it or not. But you just have to continue to minimize until you can reach a state of net zero, right? So there are enough tools out there. So all I can tell you is tell us which process, and we can tell you if there is a methodology already in place to measure those emissions, because big tech is just too wide.
Srishti is asking a question on what should be the ideal size of a pilot project if the scale is community level itself.
It depends on the project itself. Srishti, it depends on the project itself. So if it's a nature-based solution, there are costs involved. So the pilot project can be as small as even 1 or 2 acres, provided it needs to make techno-commercial sense. So some people do not get involved in very, very small projects because the cost involved to verifying if the emissions have really been reduced or not is comparatively high for smaller projects. So there is no limitation on a pilot project, provided the cost makes sense.
Sangeeta, your question on how do you get people to accept new material for construction, inner wall partitions, even though it is proven and is one of the most sustainable materials. I'll take that. And Kavin, if you have input, that'll be great. See,
Please.
there is a fundamental buying decision problem that you will need to solve for first, which is that typically when you're talking about construction, then it's a B2B procurement process, which means you either have a contractor or you have a large builder who has a person who is a materials contractor, right? So your conversation needs to be appealing to that end consumer who's going to be going out and buying, end customer who's going to be going out and buying. But there is another problem that you have in place, which is that when you talk about walls and partitions, these are typically things that are covered with paint or wallpaper, and it's not usually exposed unless you're talking about red brick, unless it's part of the design, right? Let's put it that way. So what ends up happening is, I apologize, I keep thinking I put my phone on silent, but apparently I haven't. So one of the biggest things that you will have to solve for is understanding market aesthetic attractiveness and final product fit and finish as it goes out. Is it going to be covered under a brick? Is it going to be a wall that is covered under paint, and therefore it becomes a commodity, and therefore what you don't see, you don't associate higher value for? Or do you then go to the bottom end where there is a procurer who is about the value prop, which is very clearly on penny saved per square foot, right? So you need to figure out where your value prop is. And if you want to have another conversation, I'm happy to have another conversation with you. Come in if you have inputs, then come in, you're on mute.
So firstly is sustainable materials. The whole conversation has been going on for a while. If you can show people what is the benefit to having sustainable materials, and if you can show longer, durability and better return on investment, which are some of the most important factors in decision making when purchasing, materials like that, I think you'll have a better buy-in. And also there are a lot of incentives out there for buying more sustainable materials. And so all that should be used in a good packaging to help people understand that this is what needs to be done now. Happy to take the other question on greenwashing. I know it's a concern. Greenwashing is rampant and everyone would agree with that. Are there any certifying agencies in India to validate claims made by product manufacturers as of now consumers rely on social media influencing? Okay. First, you'll have to understand that there are enough methodologies and agencies out there that verify the integrity of your project. What is greenwashing is when somebody is able to pollute knowing that they don't have to reduce their emissions, but then they continue to pollute because they can buy somebody else's credits to balance their emissions. Now, if that person voluntarily is doing it to continue to retain the same process without any reduction of emission, it is greenwashing because the profits could be used to reduce their emissions. The ideal game is to reduce your emissions, and whatever you cannot reduce, your intent will be to offset, right? So the agency will not verify if your intent is there or not, but you as a social media influencer can question saying, why are you not reducing your emissions and just putting your money in cheaper credits? So that is what greenwashing is. So greenwashing is a concern, there is no doubt. But will we stop taking money from people who are willing to invest in climate? No, because we need all the resources we can get to continue to keep ramping up the climate efforts. So this is something we'll have to continue to find the balance, but we don't support greenwashing. All our projects do not support greenwashing, but it is something that the whole society and community at large needs to continue to work on. And governments can only say, continue to reduce as much as you can, and only what you can't reduce, please offset. That's the best way to avoid greenwashing. I hope that answers your question and provides some knowledge about, how this is evaluated, in the greenwashing or not space. If possible, it's a question from Azim. If possible, please share your insights on the handicraft industry and growth in the future. Is that for me, for you, I suppose?
Well, there is a huge government push for handicraft and export of Indian handicraft and for development of Indian craftsmanship. there is a push. So there will be grants, there will be funds available to people who are doing this as an initiative. I was speaking to someone who runs the Museum of Goa day before yesterday, and they were talking about how Goa does not have its own memorabilia and souvenirs. 90% of the souvenirs come from China. And whatever 10% they have actually comes from Kerala, which is all the coconut-based souvenirs. So Goan handicraft and souvenirs for take back has not existed till now. So there is definitely a market, and I think somewhere it comes down to creative aesthetics and a community that you build around the handicrafts. It's all about the story, like Kavin said. And please remember that this is not about story doctoring and spin doctoring. That's the way businesses of the past existed. The industrial era businesses were all about spin doctoring, right? You were, for example, cough syrup is killing babies in Africa as we speak. It's killing human beings in Africa as we speak. Human products, cough syrups made in India, which are, so, with spin doctoring, what happens is you can release inferior products or dangerous products by paying off people and claiming veracity. With handicrafts, what happens is that the craftsmen lack creative finesse. I'm using these words very carefully. They lack creative finesse. The reason they lack creative finesse is a social problem, because we have not had sponsors for creativity in this country after the Maharajas were made redundant. So we had 150 kingdoms in this country before the Mughals raided us, and they then set the plate for a lot of conquests in the future, the colonial conquests that happened. So what happened is that became an extractive economy, and we lost the ability to. So when the British came, for example, what they did to the textile industry with the mills took away the entire livelihood of a lot of handmade textiles out of India, and therefore a lot of the design aesthetics are lost. So when I say that you need to go back to creative finessing, which the craftsmen lack, you need to. I was at the Sungadi manufacturing outfits in Dindikal area last year, middle this year, and what I realized is that the manufacturing process, the people, the unit, there is a lot of conversation around the ink and the dyes getting into because these units are all within the village. But what ends up happening is the people who are taking the grants and the people who are doing this, they're selling in Poompuhar, and it doesn't really come down to the craftsmen at the end. So therefore, there is no money left for creative finessing. So if you are talking about making handicrafts, please make sure that when you get funds and you start in this direction, you create an appropriate kitty for developing the creative muscle in your craftsmen, because they will have the execution muscle. They'll be able to output, but to ideate and to, what kind of colors to use, what kind of combination, how. So for example, if you see the Koreans, they've created an entire industry of merchandise and the entire industry of anime and manga, because they developed a very keen sensibility. The anime industry, and I'm taking a segue here, but it's not common knowledge. The anime industry is so standout because anime in their animation style do not follow human form. They don't try, if they animated me, they won't try to make me look like me. They'll try to make me look like a cat or a dog version of me. They're anthropomorphized the human form, and therefore, so their bodies are all very feline. So they change the design language. So you need in handicrafts to get into that space. Otherwise, you're talking about dastakar, you're talking about Poompuhar, same Gisapita, that evolution will not happen. So please kindly invest in creative transformation for finessing. There was also another question which I wanted to, there was a question on adult diapers. Salma, your question really captured my attention, because this actually goes back to my slide on resonant frequency and how it's very hard to fight resonant frequency. You're fighting convenience seeking, comfort seeking, and you are fighting responsibility shirking. See, when you're talking about cloth diapers or reusable pads, example, right, with women reusable pads, what happens is, or with a child baby diapers, washable diapers, there's a certain cuteness factor with babies. Babies are not on solid foods. Babies poop is not difficult to handle. Babies pee a lot, but that pee doesn't have uric quantities on a higher level. So what happens over there is it's very easy for you to process the biological waste that goes onto your product. If you take menstrual pads, which are biodegradable or they are, washable, assuming that the woman who is using the menstrual pad gets to wash her own pad, there is no cringe factor or there is no repulsive factor. No one is repulsed by it, right? It doesn't trigger the negative reptilian brain in us because it's my own biological waste. I'm washing, I'm okay. It depends upon what biological waste we're talking about. Urine is fine, right? Human blood is still okay. But stool matter, fecal matter is difficult for anybody to process. When you're talking about adults and you're talking about adults who are past 60, you want convenience and you want to shirk the responsibility. So non-sustainable plastic lined diaper, unfortunately, will stay the baseline of behavior. In order to change it will take a lot more thinking. I don't have the solution for it right now because it needs groupthink. It needs behavior change at a different level. And you need, like Kavan said earlier, you need to keep testing the pilots that you create to get scale. You need to keep testing. You cannot rest on it. Kavan, if you have any inputs. I know the team wants to say something. Ashna?
Hi, both of you. Thank you so much for answering the questions very diligently. We do have few more questions, but I think we can keep it on hold. We can ask them to share the questions on email and we'll get back to you if you have some time to answer those. We have already exceeded for more than 15-20 minutes now. So I think we can close. Thank you so much, Kavin and Theresa, for extending the time and so diligently answering all of these questions. Loved the session and I'm sure all of them gained very good actionable insights to work. Thank you so much again, both of you. And thank you all of the participants to be so interactive during the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick thing for anybody asking if there are methodologies for tracking on. I see 3 or 4 questions. I'm just going to take the liberty of saying carbon credits can be calculated for most of the processes out there. So that is a blind yes. And if it doesn't exist, methodologies can be created and registered if you have the know-how to create your carbon footprinting. So because that question has come up 3-4 times and we didn't have the opportunity to get to it today. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Ronnie, and thank you, Ashna.
Have a safe flight, Kavin. Thank you so much. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again.